Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of fascinating sources and, well, we really try to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. The goal is always to help you become instantly more well-informed.
That's the plan.
And today we're embarking on a bit of a journey into the surprising origins and evolutions of words. Specifically, words starting with the letter I.
Right? A fascinating letter, linguistically speaking.
We're going to uncover some stories hidden in plain sight, tracing how foundational concepts like, self, image, even negation have shaped our vocabulary.
And how some words have taken some really unexpected detours through history. It's quite the ride.
This deep dive promises some genuine aha moments, I think. So yeah, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. Our source material today is, well, it's a real treasure trove of linguistic history. It comes from the Oxford Dictionary of Word Histories.
Okay.
And this isn't just about, looking up definitions. It's really about seeing words as living things, things that shift and grow and sometimes completely transform their meaning over centuries.
Reflecting changes in how people thought, right, in society.
Exactly, reflecting profound changes in human thought and society. What's truly fascinating here is how these seemingly simple words, these I words, actually mirror complex shifts in how we perceive ourselves and the world around us.
So our mission today.
Our mission as your guides is to illuminate these historical currents, to make you instantly more knowledgeable about the very language we use every single day, often without a second thought.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with a word that's absolutely fundamental to our very being, I. Just I. It seems so basic, so singular, almost primal.
It does feel that way, doesn't it?
Yet its linguistic relatives, as you'll show us, connected to something much larger. Stretching across ancient cultures into philosophy, this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
It absolutely does. The pronoun I, well, in Old English, it comes from deep Germanic roots. You can still hear its echo in modern Dutch, ik.
Ich, right?
And German, ich.
Ich. Yeah, I know that one.
But if you trace it back even further, you find it stems from a really ancient Indo-European root.
Indo-European, so like the ancestor of huge language families.
Precisely. And this root is incredibly significant because it's shared with Latin ego, ego.
Ego, like Sigmund Freud ego.
Well, yeah, the same root word, though obviously Freud layered on a lot more meaning. But it's also shared with the Greek ego, also ego.
Wow. So I and ego are linked way, way back.
Right at the source. This deep connection immediately links our most individual, self-referential pronoun, our I, to the broader, more complex concept of egoism. It's a subtle but, pretty powerful link right there in the etymology. The linguistic foundation for acknowledging the individual self seems to have always carried within it the potential for an elevated or maybe even an excessive focus on that self.
It's like the seed of ego was present from the very beginning of I. That's quite a thought.
It is, isn't it? Language often holds these deep connections we don't consciously think about.
Okay, so from the singular, almost physical I, and its inherent link to ego, let's then move to something more abstract. Idea and ideal.
Good transit.
These words feel so lofty, so purely mental. How do they fit into this I universe we're exploring? They don't immediately scream I.
They fit perfectly, actually, and their origins are deeply philosophical, echoing that concept of seeing that's subtly present even in the roots of I.
Seeing? How so?
Well, the word idea, IDEA, was adopted into late Middle English directly from Platonic philosophy.
Plato.
And for Plato, an idea wasn't just, a random thought in your head. It was an eternally existing pattern, a perfect, unchanging form.
Forms, right. Like the perfect form of a chair or something.
Exactly. From which all individual imperfect things in the world, like all the chairs we actually see, derive their existence.
Okay, got it.
Now, this concept comes to us via Latin from the Greek icon. That's E-I-K-O-N, pronounced icon.
Icon. Sounds like icon.
It does. We'll get to that. Icon means form or pattern, and it itself comes from the base of the Greek verb eidein, I-D-E-I-N, eidein.
And idean means?
To see.
Ah, there it is.
There it is. This origin reveals a foundational link between seeing, literally perceiving something with your eyes, and forming a concept in your mind.
So understanding is like seeing the true form.
In a way, yes. It suggests that our earliest ways of grasping abstract concepts were rooted in these visual metaphors. You see the point?
I do, yeah. Okay, so that's idea. What about ideal?
Very similar story. Ideal dates from the same period, also a Platonic term, meaning existing as an archetype. It comes from late Latin idealis.
Archetype. Okay.
And then much later, in the late 18th century, idealism emerged as a distinct philosophical term, often directly contrasted with realism.
Right. Idealism versus realism.
And that came from French idealism or German idealismus, but building on that same earlier Latin root.
It's amazing how these philosophical terms filter down into everyday use.
It really is. These words beautifully illustrate how a concept, initially tied to a specific, quite complex philosophical system, gradually broadened its meaning. It becomes part of our everyday discourse, but still kind of carries that weight of perfection or aspiration.
That makes sense. And from those perfect, unseen forms, we shift now to icon and idol.
Right. Back to the icon connection you spotted.
These are about visible images, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And reverence. But you mentioned they also carry stories of, well, power and even deception.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Icon entered English in the mid-16th century, and its original meaning was actually simile or likeness.
Simile, like in grammar. As brave as a lion.
Kind of, yeah. In the sense of a likeness or comparison, like idea. It comes via Latin from that Greek icon we just talked about, likeness, image.
Okay.
Now, here's a really fascinating historical example that shows the word's immense power. In the early 17th century, the Greek spelling icon, E-I-K-O-N, was famously used in the title Icon Basilic.
Icon Basilic. Sounds grand.
It means royal image. It was a book supposedly written by King Charles the Rest around the time of his execution.
Charles the First, the one who lost his head.
That's the one. The book portrayed him as a martyred king very sympathetically, and it was incredibly popular, hugely popular.
How popular?
Get this, 47 editions were published. In that era, that's a massive bestseller.
Now,
It was so influential that Parliament actually felt they had to counter it. They commissioned John Milton, yes, that John Milton, to write a rebuttal.
Milton. Paradise Lost Milton.
The very same. His book was called Iconoclastes.
Iconoclastes. That sounds like icon smasher.
Exactly what it means. Image breaker. Milton's work systematically refuted the icon basilic paragraph by paragraph. It was a true battle of narratives, fought with words and images.
So the power of an icon, a symbolic image, was literally shaping political discourse.
Absolutely. It vividly illustrates the immense power of an image, whether it's visual or literary, in shaping public opinion and political outcomes.
And the word icon itself kept evolving after that.
It did. Its current senses, referring to, say, representational symbols on a computer screen or a painting in the Eastern Church, those only date from the mid-19th century.
All right.
And its modern use for a person representing a movement or idea, like a fashion icon or a cultural icon, that's an even later development.
Fascinating. So what about idol? It sounds similar but feels different, more negative maybe.
You're right, it often carries a more negative weight. Idol entered Middle English from Old French idol, which also came from Latin idolum, meaning image, form. Very similar root path to icon initially.
But the meaning diverged.
Yes. Its early use in ecclesiastical Latin, Church Latin, specifically meant idol in the sense of a false god.
Ah, okay. That's a big difference.
A huge difference. It immediately carries a strong negative connotation compared to icon, which could be a revered religious image. Think about how that distinction sets up a moral judgment. An icon might be an image to be revered within a certain context. An idol is often presented as an image to be rejected, something worshipped wrongly.
Like the golden calf in the Bible.
Exactly like that. The figurative use of idol for a thing or a person revered excessively, almost to the point of unhealthy worship, like a teen idol that dates from the mid-16th century.
So around the same time, icon was coming into English.
Pretty much. And then idolater, meaning a worshiper of idols, came into late Middle English based on the Greek idolatries. That's E-I-D-O-L-L-A-T-R-E-S.
Idolater. Okay.
So this whole cluster of words, icon, idol, idolater, vividly demonstrates the fine language draws between a revered image and a dangerously worshipped one. A distinction that's often been drawn along religious or ideological lines throughout history.
It's amazing how much judgment is packed into those related words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and finally, pulling all these threads together, ego, idea, icon, idol, we get to identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the very modern concepts, relatively speaking, of identity crisis and even identity theft. It feels like we've traveled centuries in just a few words.
We really have, and it's a journey that truly reflects the growing complexity of human self-perception and our social structures.
So identity itself, when did that appear?
Identity appeared in late 16th century English. And its early examples meant simply the quality of being identical, sameness.
Identical. Okay.
It came from late Latin identitas, which is derived from Latin idem, meaning same.
Idem, same. Got it.
So at its root, identity was about sameness, about being indistinguishable from something else or being the very same thing over time.
But that's not quite how we use it now, is it? It feels more personal, more unique.
Exactly. The meaning has shifted significantly. Fast forward to the 1950s and we see the phrase identity crisis emerge.
Erickson territory.
Precisely. A term signifying a profound questioning or uncertainty about oneself, one's place in the world. Erickson described it as a period of intense self-exploration, particularly common in adolescence, but possible at other life stages too.
That's a huge leap from just sameness.
It is. It shows a move towards understanding identity as something complex, constructed, and potentially unstable.
And then identity theft. That feels very 21st century.
It's quite recent, yes. Coined in the U.S. during the 1980s. It's a stark modern reflection of how crucial and also how vulnerable our personal information and our sense of self have become in the digital age. Our identity is now something that can literally be stolen.
Wow. And the verb identify.
That also emerged around the mid-17th century. Initially, it meant to treat as being identical with. Over time, it developed the sense of recognizing or establishing who or what someone or something is.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of and society when we trace this line from the simple I all the way to something as complex and fraught as identity theft?
That's a fantastic question to ask. What really leaps out from this journey, I think, is how our language for the self has matured, or at least become more complex.
Matured how?
It's evolved from a simple individual declaration, that primal I, to an intricate, multifaceted construct. Identity now isn't just internal, it's also externally recognized, defined by documents, data.
And, as we just said, vulnerable.
And vulnerable. These shifts in vocabulary aren't just about new words appearing. They're direct reflections of society's growing focus on individual consciousness, on collective representation through icons and idols, and even on the anxieties that come with defining who we are in a complex, interconnected world.
So language is like a mirror.
It's very much a linguistic mirror, reflecting our psychological and sociological development over time. It's charting our changing understanding of what it means to be a self.
That makes so much sense. It's almost like language is building its own philosophical treatise one word at a time, just by evolving naturally.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Okay, let's pivot. From the self and its images, let's turn to something equally fundamental, but maybe even more chameleon-like, the in prefix.
Ah, yes, in.
Yeah.
Small prefix doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is. This tiny linguistic building block feels like a true paradox. It can mean not, but it can also mean into or upon.
Two seemingly opposite things.
Exactly. It's like it holds a contradiction right at its core. Let's unpack how that dual nature has shaped countless English words, often in, well, quite surprising ways.
It's a brilliant paradox, isn't it? And you're right, this dual origin, which comes largely from Latin, shapes a vast number of English words. It makes an incredibly powerful, though sometimes confusing, prefix.
Powerful but confusing sounds about right.
It's truly a testament to the, maybe, flexibility and the depth of inherited linguistic structures. We see it in thousands of words, literally thousands. But maybe let's pick out a few really illustrative examples that show this linguistic split personality.
Okay, where should we start? The not version.
Let's do that first. The negative in, meaning not or without. This prefix often creates a direct opposite of a root word. It highlights a lack or a deviation from some kind of norm or standard.
Right, like incorrect means not correct. Simple enough.
Exactly. Or take immaculate. This word entered late Middle English, and its original sense was free from moral stain.
Moral stain, okay.
It comes directly from the Latin immaculatus, meaning not stained. The im part is the not, and maculatus comes from macula, meaning spot or stain.
Ah, so immaculate is literally unspotted.
Precisely. It was only later, in the early 18th century, that it gained the more general sense of just spotlessly clean.
And the Immaculate Conception.
That phrase dates from the late 17th century and refers specifically theologically to the doctrine of the Virgin Mary's conception being free from original sin. Again, free from, not stained by sin. It's a word that really emphasizes purity through the absence of a blemish.
So it's not just clean, but specifically unstained. That distinction feels quite deliberate.
It is deliberate, and what's fascinating as you look through etymologies is how often the negative form of a word, the in version, appears in the written record before its positive counterpart.
Really? You mean like unhappy showing up before happy? Though that's not in.
Yeah. Well, with the in prefix specifically, yes. Consider incomprehensible. This word came into late Middle English, and it actually appeared in texts before its positive opposite, comprehensible.
No way.
It's true. It's from Latin incomprehensibilis, meaning not able to be understood.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So the concept of something being beyond understanding was articulated before the concept of it being easy to understand.
Yeah.
That feels very human, doesn't it?
To first label the difficult or the unknown.
It really does. It speaks volumes, perhaps, about the early human experience, maybe the prevalence of things, mysteries, phenomena that truly defied easy explanation. You name the difficulty first.
Okay, that's fascinating. Any other examples like that?
Absolutely. We see a similar pattern with invincible. This word, also from late Middle English, appeared earlier in the record than its supposed opposite, vincible.
Vincible. I don't think I've ever even used that word. Most people haven't. It means capable of being overcome. But invincible comes from Latin invincibilis, meaning not able to be overcome. So again, the concept of something being unconquerable was linguistically established before the notion of something being conquerable.
It's like the human mind gravitated towards defining the limits, the negations first, the impossibilities.
That's a good way to think about it. It defined the not before the is, and then there's insane.
Okay, not sane.
Essentially, yes. It entered English in the mid-16th century from Latin insanus, which meant not healthy. Originally more about physical health, but quickly applied to the mind.
Not healthy. Interesting.
And there was an interesting, though now obsolete sense, meaning causing insanity. Shakespeare famously used it in Macbeth. After the witches vanish, Banquo asks Macbeth, "Have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner?"
The insane root, something that makes you insane.
Exactly. Its modern sense, describing actions, an insane decision, as well as people, developed later from the mid-19th century. So it went from unhealthy to reason-taking to our modern, broader usage.
That's a great selection of examples for the negative in. It really does make you wonder about the default state of things in the minds of early English speakers, as if defining by abscess, by what something isn't, was sometimes the primary way of understanding.
It certainly seems that way sometimes, looking at the evidence, the power of negation in shaping thought.
Okay, but let's flip the coin. Because in isn't always negative. How about the in that means in, into, upon, or towards? This one is just as prolific, right? But with a completely different energy.
Indeed. A totally different flavor. This in often implies movement, placement, intensity, creation, filling, or influencing. It gives rise to a completely different set of meanings.
Okay, like what? Give us some examples.
Well, take illuminate, from late Middle English, meaning to throw light on, brighten.
The light on our in.
Exactly. Its Latin root illuminare comes from in meaning upon and lumen meaning light. So light upon.
Makes sense.
The sense of enlighten intellectually followed pretty quickly in the mid-16th century, which is a beautiful metaphorical extension, isn't it? From physical light to mental clarity.
Yeah, shedding light on a topic.
Precisely. And this word also has other related meanings. It later referred to the decorative practice of richly coloring manuscripts, illuminated manuscripts.
Oh, right, with gold leaf and bright colors.
That usage dates from the late 17th century, and around the same time, the plural illuminations was used for decorative lights put up in a town for a festival or celebration.
So literally bringing light into a space or a mind or even a book, it really shows the breadth of that prefix.
It does. Another powerful example is imbue, I-M-B-U-E.
Imbue, okay.
From late Middle English, it originally meant saturate, like soaking something through. It comes from Latin imbier, meaning to moisten.
Moisten or saturate.
Right. But its modern sense, which is more common now, is to inspire or permeate with a feeling or quality. That emerged in the mid-16th century. You find it in John Milton's Paradise Lost, where he writes, "Thy words with grace divine imbued."
Imbued with grace, like
Yep.
it's soaked into you.
Exactly. It evokes a sense of deep spiritual saturation, almost literally pouring grace into someone. It's a very inward kind of verb.
Okay.
What else?
How about impact?
Impact. Use that all the time.
We do. Initially, back in the early 17th century, it was mainly a verb meaning to press closely or to fix firmly. From the Latin impingere, meaning to drive in.
Yeah, I've been physical.
Very physical. The figurative noun use, meaning the effect or influence of something, the impact of the decision, that's actually a later development from the early 19th century.
So it went from physically driving something into another to the profound effect it has.
A classic case of physical meaning becoming abstract.
Oh.
Many people don't realize that physical origin.
I certainly didn't. It just feels like effect now.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Similarly, think about influence. Influence.
Okay. From late Middle English, it derived from medieval Latin influentia, which literally meant inflow.
Inflow, like a river.
Sort of. It originally referred to a general influx, but specifically in astrology, it denoted the flowing in of an ethereal fluid from the stars, which was thought to affect human destiny.
Ah, the influence of the star.
Exactly. That's where it comes from. The more general sense of an imperceptible or indirect action exerted to cause changes became established in English by the late 16th century.
Still feels like something flowing in and causing an effect.
It does, and this connection is brilliantly illustrated by the word influenza itself.
The flu. Seriously.
Seriously. Influenza emerged in English in the mid-18th century. It's an Italian word that literally means influence.
Why?
It was applied to a major epidemic that began in Italy in 1743, supposedly due to the unfavorable influence of the stars, but more generally because of its widespread, seemingly invisible influence on public health.
Wow. So the flu is named after the astrological influence it was thought to have.
Originally, yes. It captures that sense of an invisible force flowing into a population and having a widespread effect.
That's amazing. Okay, one more inward one, maybe?
Let's do inculcate. I-N-C-U-L-C-A-T-E.
Inculcate. Sounds quite formal.
It does. From the mid-16th century, it means to instill an attitude, idea, or habit by persistent instruction, to teach something thoroughly.
Okay, where does the in come in?
It comes from Latin, inculcare, which meant to press in or tread in, and inculcare itself comes from in, into, and calx, meaning heel.
Heel, like on your foot.
Exactly. So the core notion is pressing something firmly into the mind or memory, almost as if you were using your heel to stamp it in or tread it down repeatedly.
That's a very vivid image for teaching, maybe a bit forceful.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
but it captures that sense of embedding knowledge deeply.
Okay, the sheer number of words that start with in and refer to either putting something in or the complete opposite, not something. It's just incredible.
It is staggering when you start looking.
It really highlights how much the Romans, through Latin, influenced our language, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they gave us this fundamental linguistic toolkit, these prefixes, that continues to build new words even today.
It truly does. The Latin prefixes in, con, pre, sub, ex, and so on, they are like the foundational bricks of much of our English vocabulary, especially the more formal or technical vocabulary.
And understanding them helps.
Immensely. Understanding them provides an incredible shortcut to deciphering new words, even ones you've never encountered before. If you know in can mean not or into, you can make a pretty good guess about a new in word based on the context and the root it's attached to.
It reveals the layers of history hidden inside the word.
Exactly. Embedded in every utterance. For instance, think about the Latin root insula. I-N-S-U-L-A.
Insula. Sounds like insolent.
It does. Insula means island. Knowing that immediately helps you understand a whole cluster of related words. Like insular, meaning relating to an island, or metaphorically narrow-minded, interested only in your own group, like being cut off on an island.
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
Or insulate, as you said, literally to make like an island, meaning to separate something, often to prevent heat, sound, or electricity from passing through,
Yeah.
covering it to isolate it.
Like insulation in walls.
Mhm.
Keeps the heat in.
Right. And then isolate, which also comes from insula via Italian isolato, to make into an island, to set apart completely.
Wow. Island. Insular, insolent, isolate. All from insula.
All connected by that core idea. So this deep dive into word origins acts as a powerful blueprint for understanding. It shows the logic, the connections, the layers of history beneath the seemingly chaotic surface of our language.
That's a fantastic way to think about it, a linguistic blueprint. Okay, so we've seen I and identity and the two faces of in. Now let's explore some words whose journeys through time have taken the most unexpected twists and turns.
Ah, the really quirky ones.
Yes. These are the ones that make you say, I had no idea. They're the linguistic equivalent of finding a hidden passage or discovering a word's secret identity. This is where the story truly surprises us.
Absolutely. These are some of the most delightful and sometimes bizarre revelations in our language. Where should we start? Maybe with some everyday words with surprising pasts.
Sounds good. Hit me with one.
Okay, how about ice? Seems straightforward, right? frozen water.
Yeah, pretty basic.
But think about the phrase break the ice.
To start a conversation, make people feel comfortable.
Right. But where does it come from? It dates from the late 16th century, and originally it was literal.
Literal, like actually breaking ice.
Yes. It referred to carving a passage for boats that were frozen in harbors or rivers during winter. You had to literally break the ice to get things moving.
No way.
Then it became figurative, meaning making a start in any difficult undertaking, and eventually narrowed down to its current social meaning of breaking through cold reserve or awkwardness between people.
That's brilliant. I'll never hear break the ice the same way again. Okay, what else with ice?
Well, ice in confectionery, like ices or ice cream, that only arose in the 18th century. Thackeray's Vanity Fair, for instance, mentions characters eating ices at a pastry cook shop.
Ices. Fancy.
And ice cream itself is mid-18th century, an alteration of the earlier ice cream. And before refrigerators, you had the ice house, from the late 17th century, a special building, often partly underground, for storing blocks of ice cut from lakes in winter to be used later in the year.
A whole history just in ice. Okay, give me another surprising one.
Let's talk about imp.
Imp. Like a little mischievous demon.
That's the modern meaning, yes. But its origin is completely different. In Old English, impa or impi meant young shoot or scion.
A plant part, like a little branch.
Exactly, like a sprout from a plant. The related verb impian even meant to graft one plant onto another. It was a botanical term.
Get out. So how did it become a little devil?
It's quite a journey. By late Middle English, the noun imp was used for a descendant, especially of a noble family, like a young imp of the noble line, a chip off the old block idea growing from the family tree.
Still positive then, or at least neutral.
Right. But then it took a dark turn. Later, perhaps because of association with offshoots of evil, it started being used to mean a child of the devil or a person regarded as such.
Whoa.
Sir Walter Scott's novel Kenilworth has a line, either flibbertigibbet or else an imp of the devil in good earnest.
So associating children, maybe mischievous ones, with the devil.
Something like that seems to have happened. This darker sense then led in the early 17th century to our modern meaning of a little devil or just a mischievous child.
That's incredible. From a humble plant sprout to a naughty little sprite. It's almost as if the idea of something small and maybe uncontrolled shifted from natural growth to mischief.
It does seem to follow that kind of path. A great illustration of how connotations can completely flip over time.
Okay, that's a top contender for weirdest journey so far. How about impeach? Sounds very serious, very political now.
Very serious indeed. But its origins are more physical. In late Middle English, impeach, or its earlier spelling impatch, meant to hinder or to prevent.
Hinder, like get in the way of.
Exactly. It came from Old French impatire, meaning to impede. And that ultimately traces back to late Latin impedicare, meaning to catch or to entangle.
A tangle.
Yes. And impedicare is based on the Latin word pedica, which means a fetter, a shackle for the feet, which comes from pace, ped meaning foot.
So impage originally meant to literally trip someone up or put their feet in shackles.
Essentially, yes, to physically impede or restrain them. The sense we know today, to accuse a public official of treason or serious crimes against the state, that's recorded from the late 16th century.
So it highlights a shift from physical restraint to a legal or procedural one.
Precisely. From literally fettering someone's feet to legally entangling them through accusation, acting as a procedural impediment to their power or holding of office.
So it's not just about stopping someone, but about legally entangling them. That's a powerful evolution. Does that suggest a growing sophistication in legal systems around that time, moving beyond just physical force?
It absolutely seems to reflect that. It points towards a societal shift where power, accountability, and obstruction became increasingly defined by legal frameworks rather than just, literally tripping someone up or locking them away immediately.
Fascinating. Okay, moving on. How about ill? Seems simple, sick, not well, or bad.
Right. And it's been around a long time. It entered Middle English from Old Norse iller, which meant evil or difficult.
Evil. So ill and evil are related.
That's what's fascinating. While ill has been synonymous with evil since the 12th century, you could talk about ill deeds, meaning evil deeds. The two words are not related in origin.
They aren't. They sound so similar.
They do, but it's a coincidence. Evil has a separate Old English root. Illa comes purely from the Norse iller, so a case of converging meaning, but separate paths.
Language is tricky. Okay, let's try idiot. We touched on it, but maybe unpack it more.
Sure. As we mentioned, it came via French and Latin from Greek idishos.
Meaning private person.
Right, private person, layman, or ignorant person. The key is that in ancient Greece, an idishos was someone who didn't participate in public life, in the affairs of the polis, the city-state. They were only concerned with their own private matters. Idios meant own, private.
So being private was seen as bad or ignorant.
It seems over time that non-participation in public discourse and decision-making became associated with a perceived lack of understanding or capacity for broader thought or even civic virtue. So the word gradually shifted from meaning simply private or layman to meaning uninformed, and eventually to ignorant or stupid in the harsh way we understand it now.
Wow. That's a stark reminder of how societal values like the ancient Greek emphasis on public life get baked right into our language. It makes you wonder what our modern slang or buzzwords will say about our values in a few hundred years.
It certainly does. Words are like social fossils sometimes.
Social fossils. I like that. Okay, how about intercourse? That one seems specific now.
It does now, doesn't it? But it has quite a story of semantic narrowing.
Narrowing, meaning it used to be broader.
Much broader. From late Middle English, intercourse originally meant simply communication or dealings between people or groups, any kind of back and forth interaction.
Any kind. Like trade? We're just talking.
Both. It came from Old French entrecours, meaning exchange, commerce, which came from Latin intercursus, from intercurrere, meaning to run between. So any kind of running back and forth, any exchange, any dealing was intercourse.
So you talk about like commercial intercourse.
Absolutely. And social intercourse was a perfectly common and innocent phrase for centuries, just meaning social interaction, conversation, mixing with people.
So when did it narrow down?
The specifically sexual use of intercourse arose much later, really only becoming prominent in the late 18th century. And over time, that specific meaning became so dominant that it largely overshadowed all the earlier, broader senses.
To the point where using it in the old sense now would sound weird or suggestive.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of semantic narrowing, where a word that once covered a wide range of meanings becomes primarily, or even exclusively, associated with one very specific, in this case, highly charged, meaning.
That's one of those words that you just know must have a wild backstory, and it never disappoints.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine using social intercourse casually now without raising an eyebrow.
It really is. Context is everything, and for that word, the context has dramatically shrunk.
Okay, this is fascinating. Let's keep going with surprising twists.
How about intimate?
Intimate? Close. Personal.
Yes, but here's the twist. It's actually two distinct words that happen to be spelled identically. They have different origins.
Two words, not one word with two meanings.
Technically, two different words from two different, though related, Latin roots that ended up looking the same in English.
Okay, break it down.
Right. First, the adjective intimate, meaning closely acquainted or familiar. That entered English in the early 17th century. It comes from Latin intimatus, which was the past participle of the verb intimare, meaning to impress upon, make familiar. And that verb comes from the Latin adjective intimus, meaning inmost or deepest.
Intimus. Inmost. Okay, so intimate friends are your inmost friends. Makes sense.
Exactly. It refers to that deep personal closeness or connection. But then there's the verb intimate.
As in to intimate something, to hint at it.
Precisely. That verb entered English earlier in the early 16th century. It means to make known, state, or often to imply or hint. And it comes from a different use of that same Latin verb stem intimare, meaning to make known.
So one emphasizes the inmost quality, the other emphasizes the making known aspect.
You've got it. It highlights a crucial point about English. How can two words look and sound the same but have entirely different roots driving their core meanings? It's a powerful reminder that context is absolutely everything. You have to know if you're dealing with intimate adjective feelings or intimating verb suggestion.
That's a perfect example of how English can be both endlessly fascinating and, let's be honest, incredibly confusing sometimes.
Yeah.
You really have to pay attention.
You really do. It keeps you on your toes.
Okay, to round out these surprising twists, what about irony? That's a concept that's often misunderstood or misused today, isn't it? People say ironic when they just mean coincidental or unfortunate.
That happens all the time. And its origin actually sheds a lot of light on its true nature, which is more complex than just the opposite of what you expect.
So where does irony come from?
Irony, which came into English in the early 16th century, comes via Latin from the Greek word ironia. That's E-I-R-O-N-E-I-A.
Ironia. And that meant?
It meant simulated ignorance, or dissimulation. It comes from the Greek word iron, E-I-R-O-N, which meant a dissembler, someone who pretends to be less knowledgeable or less capable than they are, often to gain an advantage or make a point subtly.
A dissembler, someone who feigns ignorance, like Socrates maybe, the Socratic method.
Exactly. Socrates is the classic example of the urine, pretending not to know the answers to draw out his interlocutor's own contradictions. What's truly fascinating here is that root connection to feigning ignorance or dissembling.
Why is that so important?
Because it suggests that true irony isn't just an accidental outcome or a simple reversal of meaning. It implies a deliberate act, a conscious performance behind the expression, saying one thing while intentionally meaning another, often with a kind of subtle, knowing wink or a critical edge.
So it's not just a mistake or a coincidence. It's a crafted communication strategy.
Precisely. This original meaning helps us understand the true depth of ironic communication. It's often a carefully constructed linguistic device meant to convey a deeper, often critical or humorous message beneath the surface meaning. It's a knowing comment, not just an oops.
That clarifies things a lot. It's about intention, not just outcome.
Well put.
We've just covered some absolutely wild journeys words take. I mean, from imp, going from a tree branch to a mischievous devil to intercourse narrowing its meaning so dramatically. It truly shows how language is a living, breathing thing, constantly shifting.
It really is dynamic, not static at all.
And we've seen how much words can change, but also how underlying structures like those Latin prefixes in or inter persist and shape our vocabulary in these profound ways.
Absolutely. And understanding those foundational elements, as we discussed with in or inter, meaning between, like in international or interact, gives us that powerful insight, another inward, into how English vocabulary is constructed.
Insight seeing in.
Exactly. These elements aren't just, academic curiosities for linguists. They are practical linguistic tools. They allow you, the listener, to quickly grasp the potential meaning of a new word, even if you've never encountered it before, just by recognizing its parts.
Like decoding the blueprint.
It is like decoding the blueprint. It reveals the layers of history, the logic, embedded in everyday words. As we saw with insula, meaning island, connecting insular, insulate, and isolate. That deep dive into origins acts as a powerful framework for understanding the intricate design beneath the sometimes seemingly chaotic surface of our language.
What a journey through just a slice of the I words, from the ancient, almost primal roots of I itself, linking to ego, to the surprising twists of imp and ice, and the double life of the prefix in. We've really seen that every word has a story.
Often a far richer and more complex story than we might imagine just seeing it on the page.
We hope this deep dive has given you a fresh appreciation for the living history packed inside our language, and maybe inspired you to look a little closer at the words you use every single day.
It certainly has been a fascinating exploration for me, revisiting these. The evolution of these words really does illuminate not just linguistic shifts, but also how human society, our philosophies, our technology, and just everyday life have changed over centuries.
It makes you listen differently, doesn't it?
It encourages a deeper, more critical way of listening and reading, I think, prompting you to ask, wait, why this word? Or how did that word get here? You start seeing the history everywhere.
Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied.
That's the core idea. Understanding the roots helps you use the branches more effectively, perhaps.
So a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Well, as you go about your day, maybe consider this. If language is, in a way, a living record of how we've thought and experienced the world, what new meanings are we inadvertently creating right now? With our slang, our tech terms, our social media shorthand, our daily conversations.
Good question.
And looking ahead, what might future etymologists, maybe doing a deep dive 1,000 years from now, find truly surprising or revealing about our current use of words? Maybe even about our use of a phrase like deep dive itself.
That brings it full circle. What will they make of us?
Exactly. Keep exploring, keep questioning the words around you. There's always more to discover.